People have long wondered why racism began in society. Some think it started because of social and economic reasons, while others believe it's a natural part of human behavior. So why did racism start? And how did it become such a big part of our history for so long? One reason why racism started is that people tend to believe ideas that benefit them. In 1619, the first enslaved African was brought to what would become the United States. From that dark time onward, supporters of racism and white supremacy have twisted science and biology to justify unequal treatment. For over 400 years, the descendants of these enslaved people have faced abuse and unfairness, even though this is their home. Racists often use biology and genetics to set themselves apart from others. This is called scientific racism. The belief that humans are divided into different biological groups called races. It claims there is evidence to support discrimination and exploitation because some races are supposedly better than others. Not surprisingly, they consider Caucasians to be the superior race. A white scientist refused to accept that African Americans were of the same species as him. Before Darwin's theory of evolution, scientists attempted to prove that the various races were distinct from one another and could be ranked in a hierarchical manner from greatest to least important. With time, significant theories on this subject started to emerge. These theories were monogenism and polygenism. Monogenism was derived from the Old Testament, which says that God believed to have created a single race of people, beginning with Adam and Eve. After the creation of the first humans, the various races degenerated in response to climate change as they moved away from Eden, with whites regenerating the least and blacks degenerating the most. Eventually, with time and climate circumstances, they became different species. However, in polygenism, the Old Testament was ignored, and it was believed that different races were the result of different species that existed from the beginning. Despite the fact that this theory lacks any biblical support, polygyny still became a prevailing theory of racial origin. This sociological idea emerged in society in the 18th and 19th centuries during the Enlightenment and early scientific exploration. Soon, polygyny started claiming that non-white people were born inferior to white people and could never rise above them. The leading figure in polygyny at that time was a Swiss immigrant and Harvard University professor, Louis Agassiz, who said that various races were different species, as observed in animals. During the early 1800s, while in Philadelphia, Agassiz had to meet African American waiters at his hotel. However, this experience troubled him greatly for some reason because, during that time, owning black slaves was not uncommon. He then wrote a letter to his mother explaining how repulsed he felt by those men and asked whether they could be members of the same species as a European man. Throughout the late 1840s, he gave a lecture tour in northern and southern cities about natural history, geology, and the plural origin of humanity, as well as the differences between Negroes and whites. As expected, Southerners were eager to hear what Agassiz had to say because his content of racial segregation aligned with their economic beliefs. As a result, scientific racism started to emerge in the society. And as people started to believe in it, slavery became more popular. Especially when American leaders like Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, who believed in the inferiority of blacks and Native Americans, shared their beliefs with the society. Racist scientists had a collection of indigenous and black skulls. Controversial pseudo-scientific methods like craniometry started being used by scientists who were eager to prove their theories about racial superiority. In these studies, human skulls of different races were measured and compared. Since the European skulls were larger in size, researchers who believed in polygyny argued that the difference meant greater intelligence and moral superiority than the skulls of African indigenous and non-Europeans. During the 1830s and 1840s, phrenology, which is the test for a person's character, personality traits, and mental abilities, became popular. A scientist named Charles Caldwell used this study in an attempt to prove that African people were in their rightful place as being white slaves. Caldwell studied the skulls of many different species, including Africans, at the Musée de Phrenologie in Paris. In 1837, his studies concluded that the skulls of African people had tameableness, which made them suited to be slaves and required them to have a master to live their lives properly. Samuel Morton, a Philadelphia physician who published 2 significant monographs and a number of papers analyzing the physical nature of human skill, took charge of justifying the removal of Native Americans from their land during the 1830s and 1840s. In one of his papers, he compares a Negro hair to sheep's wool to support his theory that black people are not as same species as Europeans. Morton's 1839 book, Crania Americana, has detailed skull configuration and mental capacities of the 4 separate species, which include white and Native Americans. He argues that the differences between races are natural and dictated by God and are not something that is created in different environments. One of his articles concluded that the Native Americans were adverse to cultivation, slow in acquiring knowledge. Famously enough, Morton also had a collection of 51 skulls, which were turned into objects used to be measured and weighed. Racism is a social and economic construct. In the early 1900s, there was a rise of eugenics movement, which aimed to improve the genetic quality of the population and promoted the idea of the racial superiority of the whites. Referring to this, W.E.B. Du Bois famously said, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line." The consequences of this dangerous ideology were seen during the Holocaust. The world witnessed race-based justified violence happening in front of their eyes. However, after the war and death, using such language was considered extremely offensive and violent, so the right wing started finding ways to close the racist views in a more soft language and concepts. Historically, racism has been shaped by economic and political factors. The transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and system of exploitation relied heavily on racial hierarchies to justify the exploitation of certain groups. This system of subjugation was designed to protect the interest of the dominant group in power and justify the economic inequalities that were associated with race and hierarchies. On the other hand, biology also had an important role in the segregation of humans. Due to genetics, people have different skin color, hair texture, and other physical traits that make them different from one another. However, the status and social construct that comes with these features is a totally sociological phenomenon. Angela Sani, a London-based science journalist, says in her new book, Superior: The Return of Race Science, mainstream scientists, geneticists, and medical researchers still invoke race and use these categories in their work, even though we have been told for 70 years that they have no biological meaning, that they have only social meaning. This article is shared from media sources to enrich public dialogue and encourage thoughtful discussion.